2025, the world bought $3 trillion worth of oil. Almost all of it was paid in one currency, not because it was the strongest or most stable, but because of a secret deal made in a Saudi desert in 1974. It's called the Petrodollar, the most powerful financial system you've never been taught. August 15th, 1971. President Richard Nixon walks onto television and said, "I have directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold." Here's what happened. Since the end of World War II, the dollar had been backed by gold under a system called Bretton Woods. Any country holding dollars could knock on America's door and say, "I'd like my gold, please." Of course, right this way. That arrangement made the dollar the most trusted currency on Earth. But America had been printing far more dollars than it had gold to back them, funding wars, social programs, and Cold War spending. Countries noticed, and one by one, they started showing up at America's door, demanding their gold back. So Nixon slammed the window shut. No more gold for dollars. The dollar was now backed by nothing. Just trust. And trust was not exactly trusted. Then, things got worse. October 1973. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel, the Yom Kippur War. The United States backed Israel with a massive airlift of weapons. In response, Arab oil producers, OPEC, hit America with the most powerful weapon they had, oil. They slashed production, they embargoed the United States, and the price of oil exploded, from about $3 a barrel to nearly $12. Gas stations ran dry, lines stretched for blocks. Sorry, no gas today was the standard operating procedure. So now America had a currency with no gold behind it, inflation getting ugly, and the world's most important commodity being used like a weapon. Not ideal. America needed a new plan, a new anchor for the dollar. Something every country needs. Something so essential, the whole world would have no choice but to keep using US dollars. Enter Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State. He went to Saudi Arabia with a deal. "Your Majesty, you are sitting on the largest pool of oil on Earth," which is wonderful. Unfortunately, it also means you are sitting in the middle of the desert, wearing a giant sign that says, "Please invade me." So let us make a deal. You sell your oil in US dollars, you invest the extra money back into US Treasury bonds, and in return, we keep you safe. We sell you the weapons, we protect the oil fields, and anyone thinking of touching Saudi Arabia will have to deal with us first. In 1974, Saudi Arabia agreed, and within a year, the rest of the smaller OPEC members followed. So now, if any country wanted oil, it first needed dollars. Voila! The petrodollar was created. But the real genius of the system wasn't just that oil was sold in dollars. It was what happened to those dollars after. Here's how the petrodollar actually works. 3 things. First, oil is priced in dollars. As we previously mentioned, that means if any country wants oil, which unfortunately for them they do, it first needs US dollars. Japan wants oil? Dollars. Germany wants oil? Dollars. So with one rule, America created constant global demand for its currency. Second, oil exporters now receive giant piles of dollars. And countries like Saudi Arabia suddenly had a problem that I wish I had. We have more dollars than things to spend them on. We could sell huge amounts of oil, but we couldn't possibly spend all that money at home. So the extra dollars had to go somewhere. And where did they go? Right back to America, into US Treasury bonds, into American banks, into US financial markets. This became known as petrodollar recycling. Not exactly the kind of recycling that saves the planet. Third, America then used that recycled money to fund itself. It helped finance government spending. It kept demand for US debt high. It helped keep interest rates lower. Thus funds the military that protects the oil fields, that keep the oil flowing and the cycle going. See what happened? It's a loop. America doesn't even need to sell the oil, just needs the world to keep using dollars to buy them. But there's one final piece of the puzzle. One thing that historians, economists, and geopolitical analysts all agree is essential to keep this system alive. It is incogni. Just kidding. But seriously, right now data brokers are collecting your name, your email, your address, your phone number, and selling it to whoever's buying. That's how a bank calls you out of nowhere and somehow knows everything about you. And it gets worse. You get a text, a package can't be delivered. All you have to do is click a link and confirm your address. Simple, right? You click it. But there was no package. There was never a package. And now they don't just have your data, they have your device. You could spend months, sometimes years, cleaning up the damage, or you could prevent it in minutes with Incogni. On my dashboard, You can see them already going after dozens of brokers on my behalf, sending removal requests, following up, and making sure my info actually gets taken down. But the real deal is the custom removal feature on their unlimited and family unlimited plans. If you find your info on a specific sketchy site, you just point Incogni's agents to that URL, and they manually remove it for you. Go to incogni.com/crayoncapital and use code crayoncapital for 60% off. They can't harm you if they can't find you. That's incogni.com/crayoncapital, code crayoncapital for 60% off. Link in the description. Now, back to the dollar. By the 1980s, this machine was in full swing. The dollar's share of global reserves climbed to over 70%. U.S. Treasury bonds became the world's favorite safe asset, and American financial markets became the center of global capital. America could borrow cheaply, run huge deficits, and print money while pushing much of the inflation onto everyone else. Economists called it an exorbitant privilege, which is just a polite way of saying legalized robbery. But the most dangerous superpower? Sanctions. The dollar isn't just money, it's infrastructure. Global trade, banking, reserves, debt, payments. So much of it runs through the dollar system that getting cut off from it is like being kicked off the financial internet. You're not just losing access to a currency, but losing access to the grid. That makes sanctions terrifying. If America doesn't like what you're doing, they can just make your economy stop working. And what about countries that tried to move away from the dollar? Well, this is where the story gets a little uncomfortable. In 2000, Saddam Hussein said Iraq would start selling oil in euros instead of dollars. 3 years later, Iraq was invaded, and after Saddam fell, Iraqi oil sales returned to dollars. The leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, proposed a gold-backed African currency, the gold dinar, to replace the dollar in African oil trade. They held roughly 143 tons of gold to back the plan. Yet in 2011, NATO intervened. Gaddafi was killed, and the gold dinar plan died with him. Venezuela tried a different route. The country sitting on the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, 303 billion barrels. In 2018, Maduro launched the Petro, a crypto project meant to dodge sanctions and sell outside the dollar system. Despite the hype, it went nowhere. Hardly anyone could actually use it. But the defiance didn't go unnoticed. The U.S. ramped up sanctions, blockaded Venezuelan oil tankers, and in January 2026, launched a military operation that captured Maduro himself. At his press conference, Trump said the U.S. planned to run Venezuela and rebuild its oil infrastructure with American companies. The largest oil reserves on Earth were back on the table. Now, to be fair, were these conflicts caused only by challenging the dollar? Probably not. Each one had its own mess of motives: weapons concerns, drug trafficking, regional politics, humanitarian arguments. But the pattern is hard to ignore. Challenge the empire, and the empire strikes back. For decades, nobody could really break the dollar's grip. But empires don't stay unchallenged forever. It started with a single move. In 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States froze nearly $300 billion of Russia's foreign reserves and cut major Russian banks from the SWIFT payment system. Overnight, decades of Russian savings, parked in the system they were told was safe, became unreachable. And yes, it hurt Russia, but it also scared everyone else. Every government holding dollars thinks this money is only theirs as long as the US says it is. And that's when the world started moving together. China started dumping US treasuries, reducing its holdings from a peak of over $1.3 trillion to roughly $600 billion. It went on a years-long gold buying spree instead. Russia and China pushed more of their trade into yuan and rubles. Brazil and China struck deals to settle trade in their own currencies. India started paying for some Russian oil in rupees. And Saudi Arabia, the country that helped build the petrodollar system in the first place, publicly said it was open to trade in currencies other than the dollar. The numbers tell the story. The dollar's share of global reserves has fallen from 72% in 2001 to under 58% today. Central banks worldwide are hoarding gold at record levels, over 1,000 tons added in 2024 alone. The Chinese yuan now accounts for roughly 2% of global reserves. Small, yes, but it was essentially zero a decade ago. And then there's the bigger problem, the end of oil itself. 1 in 4 cars sold globally in 2025 is electric. If the world becomes less dependent on oil, it becomes less dependent on the system that requires dollars to buy oil. Now, let's be clear. The petrodollar machine still runs. The dollar still dominates 88% of foreign exchange transactions and roughly half of all global trade invoicing. No single rival, yuan, euro, gold, crypto, comes close to replacing it. But for the first time in 50 years, the machine has competition. Not one giant challenger, 1,000 small ones. As a wise saying goes, ape alone, weak, apes together, strong. What a wonderful day.